Hey, friends. Today, I'll share a thrilling story about a loyal dog, Ranger, who started acting strangely at night, guarding the baby's crib. What was he sensing? Was there a hidden danger? Watch until the end to uncover the truth. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and comment your thoughts on this mystery. Edward watched with growing concern as Ranger, their usually good-natured German shepherd, once again took up his post by the baby's crib as evening fell. This alarming behavior had become a nightly ritual over the past 2 weeks. Ranger's ears were alert, his body tense, and a low, continuous growl rumbled from deep in his throat. "I just can't figure it out," Edward whispered to his wife Eleanor, who stood in the doorway of the nursery. Ranger had been part of their family for 5 years, ever since they adopted him from a shelter. Known for his exceptional kindness, he was a favorite among the neighborhood children during evening walks. Since they brought their newborn Henry home 3 months ago, Ranger had shown nothing but protectiveness and tenderness. He would lie calmly by the crib during the baby's naps, wagging his tail slowly at any sound. But 2 weeks ago, everything changed. Now, every night, as if on schedule, Ranger would assume a guard position and growl. With the arrival of warm spring nights, Edward thoroughly inspected the nursery. The windows were securely closed, the mosquito nets intact, and there were no signs of mice or squirrels. Yet, Ranger continued to anxiously stare at the same corner, even when Henry was peacefully asleep. Eleanor suggested a visit to the vet, thinking that pain or anxiety might be causing the strange behavior. After a thorough examination, the vet confirmed that Ranger was perfectly healthy for his age. The specialist also mentioned that dogs often react to changes in the environment that humans might not notice, such as faint sounds or shifts in air pressure. Edward spent hours observing Ranger's reactions, realizing that his growling wasn't aggressive, but more like a warning signal, similar to how he reacted to strange noises outside. Importantly, Ranger was exceptionally gentle with Henry, as if guarding him from something in that corner of the room. "Maybe we should check the house," Eleanor suggested one evening, watching Ranger's odd behavior. "Remember last fall when he kept scratching the kitchen wall? That's when we found the leak." It was a reasonable suggestion. Ranger had a history of alerting them to hidden issues. The next day, Edward noticed something curious. While changing Henry's diaper, he felt a faint draft coming from the corner Ranger kept staring at. It was barely noticeable, but strong enough to slightly sway the mobile above the crib. Perhaps this was what bothered Ranger. It was known that dogs have keen hearing and sensitivity, allowing them to detect things humans cannot. That evening, as Edward watched Ranger resume his position, he realized the dog was clearly trying to warn them about something. He knelt to pat Ranger on the head, receiving a slight wag of the tail in return, though the dog's gaze remained fixed on the mysterious corner. "Good boy," Edward whispered, grateful for the loyal dog guarding their family. Whatever was troubling Ranger, they were determined to find out. Not just for their peace of mind, but for Henry's safety and Ranger's comfort. The mystery would soon be solved, but that night, Edward found solace in knowing their vigilant guardian was still protecting their son. After all, dogs often notice things that escape human attention, and Ranger had proven his reliability time and again. Early the next morning, Edward contacted a home inspection company. The inspection was scheduled for 3 days later, which felt like an eternity given Ranger's anxiety. Eleanor suggested temporarily moving Henry's crib to their bedroom, but Edward hesitated, fearing it might mask the problem Ranger was trying to alert them to. Throughout the day, Edward noticed a new pattern in Ranger's behavior. In the morning, the dog seemed content, often napping in the sunlight streaming through the nursery window. But by late afternoon, his demeanor changed. He began pacing nervously between the nursery door and the troubling corner, his anxiety intensifying as evening approached. Working from home, Edward set up his workspace near the nursery to closely observe Ranger and try to pinpoint the cause of his distress. He noticed the draft he had felt earlier grew stronger at certain times, especially when the afternoon sun warmed the wall. Eleanor returned from work as usual, holding a small notebook of questions for the inspector. She also spoke to an elderly neighbor who had lived next door for 40 years. The neighbor mentioned noticing water stains on her wall, the one shared with Henry's nursery after the last heavy storm. This new information linked the house's issues to Ranger's anxiety. That evening, as Ranger resumed his post by the crib, Edward brought a stepladder into the nursery to examine the troubling corner more closely. Ranger watched him intently but stayed by the crib. Shining a flashlight, Edward noticed thin cracks in the ceiling paint radiating from the corner and a faint, almost imperceptible cobweb. Meanwhile, Henry slept peacefully, his steady breathing contrasting sharply with the moving shadows on the wall that Ranger kept eyeing. But the dog's attention repeatedly returned to the corner. Eleanor spent the evening on her tablet, whispering her findings to Edward. It could be anything. A weakened pipe, house settling, or something electrical, she mused. What worries me most is why Ranger's reaction intensifies at night. It's as if something changes when the house cools. They decided to take turns keeping watch overnight. During Edward's shift around midnight, the draft in the nursery grew stronger, accompanied by a faint, almost whistling sound. With each new noise, Ranger's ears perked up, and his growl remained protective, not threatening. Holding Henry, Edward walked the room's perimeter. As he approached the suspicious corner, Ranger stood and followed, positioning himself between Edward and the wall. His behavior wasn't aggressive but emphasized his role as a guardian ready to protect the family from a hidden threat. Placing Henry back in the crib, Edward felt deep gratitude for Ranger's unwavering vigilance. Dogs have instincts and senses that surpass humans, and it was clear Ranger was desperately trying to warn them about something important. The inspector's visit felt long overdue, but until then, Edward found comfort in knowing their faithful guardian was still watching over Henry. Ranger's loyalty reminded them they weren't alone in facing this troubling mystery. Later, as Edward finally went to bed, leaving Ranger at his usual post, he felt the answer was close. He was grateful for the dog's presence, knowing he would alert them if danger arose. Often, Edward thought, animals notice what humans miss. The next morning, the inspector arrived early and immediately noticed Ranger's alert posture in the nursery. Sometimes dogs are more useful than any tool we can use, he remarked, unpacking his equipment. They notice things our devices might miss, like the sound of water in pipes or the creak of stressed wood. Edward recounted Ranger's recent behavior while Eleanor held Henry. The inspector listened carefully, nodding, and began his examination. He started with the floors, checking their level and moisture. Soon, he found a slight but noticeable slope. "This is interesting," the inspector said, placing his hand on the wall. He pulled out a moisture meter and ran it over the area. The readings spiked in the spot Ranger had been fixated on. "There's clearly high moisture here," he said. "And look here." He shone his flashlight on the baseboard, where a faint dark streak was visible. Ranger remained vigilant throughout the inspection, his gaze fixed on the corner. When the inspector tapped the wall, Ranger's ears perked up. This was a different sound from his usual evening growl, a more insistent signal, as if he was relieved someone else had noticed what he sensed. The inspection continued with meticulous precision, uncovering more alarming issues. The inspector found significant damage to the exterior brickwork, pointing to a faulty gutter as the main cause. Instead of diverting water away, it was leaking into the house during rains, gradually weakening the structure. "The vibrations you've been feeling," he explained, "are likely caused by water moving through damaged materials, like loose bricks or rotted wood." It was clear the problem had worsened over time and required immediate action to prevent further damage. Due to an unusually rainy spring, the inspector noted, the sun heats the wall during the day, causing moisture to evaporate and rise. But at night, as the walls cool, the moisture condenses and flows downward. This cycle of water movement was likely what Ranger detected. The changes were minimal, but a dog's hearing is far more sensitive than a human's. Eleanor held Henry tighter, her face a mix of relief that the situation was finally clear and concern about the consequences. The inspector continued his thorough examination, taking photos and detailed notes. He discovered the issue extended to the crawl space, where moisture had begun damaging the structural supports. "If this had gone unnoticed for a few more months," he said, "the water damage would have spread, jeopardizing the stability of this part of your house. Your dog probably prevented a much more serious disaster." He added with an approving nod. Edward knelt to pat Ranger, who seemed to relax upon hearing the inspector's words. The specialist recommended immediate repairs, assuring them that while the situation was serious, it was entirely fixable with prompt action. He handed them a detailed report and recommended several reliable contractors for both exterior and interior work. That evening, as they waited for estimates from the contractors, Edward and Eleanor noticed a change in Ranger's behavior. His growling had softened, as if he sensed help was on the way. Following the inspector's advice, they temporarily moved Henry's crib to their bedroom until the repairs were complete. Watching Ranger adjust to the new setup, Edward and Eleanor grew to appreciate their dog's persistence even more. Ranger had sensed a critical issue weeks before the humans noticed, and his protective instincts may have averted a dangerous situation. The following week, the contractors began work, and the results were shocking. When they opened the wall, the water damage was extensive. The wooden beams were rotted, and mold was found in the wall cavity. The contractor suggested the vibrations Ranger felt were likely caused by a weakened beam shifting under the house's weight. "Your dog wasn't just reacting to water," the contractor said in amazement. "This beam was on the verge of collapsing." In older homes, these issues aren't always obvious until it's almost too late. Edward watched as the workers meticulously documented the damage, thinking of the many nights Ranger had stood guard, sensing hidden threats within the walls. Eleanor took time off from her teaching job to oversee the restoration process and notice changes in Ranger's behavior. His anxious growling, which had marked the evenings before, was replaced by close observation of the contractor's work. He watched intently, especially when they worked in the corner that had once seemed threatening. The crew quickly grew fond of their four-legged supervisor, noting how his ears perked up when they addressed the most damaged areas. During one visit, the local vet who had initially examined Ranger when his behavior raised concerns stopped by to check on him. She explained that dogs can detect the slightest vibrations and sounds at frequencies beyond human hearing. Ranger wasn't just reacting to the sound of water or creaking wood, she said. Dogs have an incredible ability to sense anomalies in their environment. As the repairs progressed, Edward and Eleanor learned that several other homes in their neighborhood had faced similar issues, though none had been caught as early. The contractor noted that recent unusual weather patterns had affected many houses in the area. One evening, as Edward watched the sunset through the plastic sheeting temporarily covering the window, he noticed a change in Ranger's behavior. Instead of his usual alert stance and quiet growling, the dog lay calmly on his mat, watching the workers clean up. His relaxed state confirmed Edward's belief. Their faithful dog sensed the threat had passed. The repairs took 2 weeks, and throughout that time, Henry remained in his parents' bedroom. Ranger adapted to the changes, regularly checking the nursery as if assessing the quality of the work. The crew often joked that Ranger was their best quality control supervisor. Edward happily shared the story with other parents at the park, emphasizing how important it is to pay attention to pets' behavior. "Animals sense things we don't," he said, as Ranger gently played with Henry on a picnic blanket. "What might seem like odd behavior could actually be their way of telling us something important." The local veterinary clinic even invited Edward to speak at a pet owner's seminar, where he shared Ranger's story as a prime example of how animals can detect hidden threats in a home that humans might miss. Eleanor prepared a simple presentation with photos of the damaged wall and Ranger on alert. As the repairs neared completion, Edward reflected on how close they had come to disaster. If they had ignored Ranger, dismissing his behavior as mere anxiety or jealousy, things could have ended much worse. The contractor assured them the new support beam and waterproofing would protect the house from similar issues in the future. Meanwhile, Ranger received plenty of praise and extra treats. His true satisfaction seemed to come from silently watching over Henry during their daily routines. His nighttime growling had completely stopped, replaced by calm, peaceful sleep beside the newly repaired wall. Edward often paused in the nursery doorway, feeling grateful for the deep bond between his son and their sensitive protector. Finally, the day came when Henry's crib was returned to the fully renovated nursery. The walls were freshly painted the same soft yellow, the window frames resealed, and the contractor had improved the exterior walls with additional waterproofing and upgraded the gutter system to prevent future leaks. Most importantly, the old beam had been replaced with a sturdy new support. When Ranger walked into the updated room, Edward and Eleanor watched eagerly for his reaction. The dog followed his usual inspection route, thoroughly sniffing the corner that had once troubled him. After completing his rounds, Ranger settled by the window with a contented expression, showing no signs of anxiety. His calm presence was the best confirmation that everything was now in order. That evening, as Henry was gently placed back in his crib for the first time in weeks, the difference was striking. The room now felt secure and cozy, without the cold draft that had once swayed the mobile above the crib. Ranger took his usual spot by the crib, but now he didn't need to stand guard and growl. He slept peacefully, occasionally lifting his head to check on Henry before settling back down. "What do you think of this story?" Edward asked the audience. "What are your thoughts on the relationship between dogs and children? Is it really possible? Or is it too risky to leave them together?" If you enjoyed the story, subscribe to our channel and give it a like. This tale reminds us that those who love us can become our saviors. Thank you for being with us. See you in the next video. Have a wonderful day.